Good afternoon. It's Friday the 13th of May 2022, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me in the studio today, Patrick Henningsen. Welcome to the programme, Patrick.
Great to be with you, Mike.
And we've also got Alex Thomson and Vanessa Beeley with us as well, so this is going to be an action-packed programme. Let's get straight on, Patrick, with what's going on in Ukraine then.
Well, we'll just do a little update of the situation. A lot of people have asked us, how is the conflict going? How's the war actually going? We're going to bring up here, this is from Live Map. You can go check this out online if you want to see the original source. So this is basically the live map of where things are standing at the moment in Ukraine. You can see Crimea down there at the bottom, Donbass there on the right-hand side. The areas in red are operationally, you could say, under Russian control. And then you can see where some of the battles and outbreaks are happening in the sort of red circles you'll see in certain areas. There's activity going on here. So who are the parties to this conflict here? The Russian Federation, and the other side is effectively Ukraine and NATO. We're putting those two together, Mike, because I think at this point it's safe to say that this isn't just Ukraine and Russia. So we're including NATO there as one of the combatant parties. So these are the areas you need to look at here. Kherson, Mike, this is moving up towards Odessa, very close to Odessa there above Crimea. That is under Russian control, Russian public administration, Russian cell phone coverage. It's effectively being absorbed into the Russian world, possibly as an autonomous republic in the interim. Who knows, possibly later part of the Russian Federation, too early to tell, but it's not going back, Mike, by all intents and purposes. I see a lot of Western pundits talking about Ukraine retaking these areas. I don't really see that ever happening, not in this conflict, not at this time on the timeline here. Mariupol, again, in the Western media, is calling this a siege. They're reporting Mariupol as if the city's still under siege. It's not. The fighting is confined to a very small area, Azovstal plant, which we'll show you in a little bit. So this is basically under, you could say, police control, the area of Mariupol. It's not necessarily a military theater in the same sense that some of the other areas are. In other words, it is mainly under Russian control, except for these last holdouts really in the very, very small area of the Azovstal plant. But the Western media are saying it's still up for grabs, which I think is complete, you could say that's absolutely disinformation on the part of Western media. And then up here are Kharkov. This is getting a lot of press right now. The Daily Mail reported that Russia was pushed back to its border. That looks like fake news. You could say this area around the city there, 40% really is under Russian control. The rest is fighting with Ukrainian forces controlling the other half, you could say, and it's ongoing. And here, this is the important part, which we're going to talk about. You could call this the cauldron, or this is this part of Donbass, just there to the west of the borders of Donetsk and Lugansk. This is very important, and we'll show you in a minute. Let's take a look at that Donbass cauldron. This is zooming in close here, and these are the areas that you need to pay very close attention to here. This is Severodonetsk, and then Popasnaya down here. The Russians are in control of Popasnaya. So whatever the Western media says, Russia has operational control. Russian forces, DPR forces, LPR forces together have operational control over this area. So what's happening here? This is what's happening. Look at the blue areas. You can just see the blue shades. These are Ukrainian armed force positions, ostensibly. And the red arrows, those are Russian military forces on the move. The gold area you can see is more or less, you could say, under Russian and DPR control. But here's what's happening. These two moves that we've just highlighted here potentially could split this cauldron, and that would isolate the Ukrainian forces there on the east side. That would be a game changer. That's exactly where things are headed right now. So I'm personally, Mike, quite frankly, shocked at the Western media coverage that they're in total denial right now. They're putting up all sorts of flares and distractions to keep people from this. I mean, why not report how things are actually going on the ground? They seem to be reticent to do so. And quite frankly, I'm shocked that this is the case.
Well, nothing was really surprising anymore on this. Let's just quickly move on then to sanctions. And here is, well, the latest graphic from the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. Putin's network sanctioned. So Foreign Secretary Liz Truss today is announcing fresh sanctions on Putin's wallet, in quotes, of family and friends, those whom he rewards with state positions and wealth in return for their underlying loyalty, is how that's described by the FCDO. Official records list modest assets for Putin, including a small flat in St. Petersburg, 2 Soviet-era cars from the 1950s, a trailer and a small garage. In reality, Putin relies on his network of family, childhood friends, and selected elite who have benefited from his rule and in turn support his lifetime. Their reward is influence over the affairs of the Russian state, and that goes far beyond their formal positions. Today's sanctions will hit this cabal who owe Putin their wealth. So here we're talking about Alina Kabaeva, who's a retired Olympic gymnast. She's risen to become chair of the board of the National Media Group. Then we've got Anna Zatsapolina, who's grandmother of Anna Kabaeva and associate of others and long-standing Putin associate. And then we've got the former First Lady of the Russian Federation and the ex-wife, who is also, by the way, the ex-wife of Putin, of course. And since her divorce from Putin in 2014, she's benefited from preferential business relationships with state-owned entities. So she's being sanctioned. Igor Putin, who's the first cousin of Putin and a Russian businessman. And then we've got Mikhail Putin, who's a Russian businessman and a relative of Vladimir Putin. Then we've got Roman Putin, who's the first cousin once removed of Vladimir Putin. It gets better, and the list goes on. I mean, there's a couple more names on this list, and then significantly more names in addition. So I don't know what you think of that, but it seems it just is getting more ridiculous on a daily basis.
Lots and lots of companies have a state-owned interest, Mike, especially after the sanctions in 2014. That's one of the big shifts that Russia did in order to rescue the economy. The state had to come in and bail out so many of these corporations, and in the process, they did kind of absorb them with some part of state ownership with dividends and so forth. So you might as well sanction everybody in the whole country of Russia, because pretty much everybody's got some link to some state-owned entity. It's kind of ridiculous at this point. I don't really understand what the general strategy is, other than it just sounds like a vendetta at this point.
Well, that seems how it is to me. Maybe we could bring Alex and Vanessa on. Alex, first of all, what are your thoughts on the sanctions regime?
I haven't heard of even tin pot dictators in the real third world belt having their first and second cousins being sanctioned for blood relations and alleged business ties. This is taking things to a new level. I think maybe you were too gentlemanly to mention it, but the Western cabal's claim, we hear that they are now talking about the cabal in Russia, but it's often used about our rulers, that word, in the West. The claim is that Alina Kabaeva, since she was a 24-year-old gymnast well over a decade ago, has been Putin's love interest. It's even claimed that she's married him in some secret remarriage ceremony. But this hasn't come out publicly, so the usual diplomatic and international law norms apply. As with the Elysee Palace, when President Hollande was being asked every day of the week, who is the First Lady today, sir? If he doesn't say, this is my First Lady, married or not, a president doesn't have a First Lady. It's a diplomatic and ceremonial post. So if they're claiming Kabaeva is de facto Mrs. Putina, then they ought to say so. But at present, they're committing a gross injustice against the norms of diplomacy.
Indeed. Vanessa, have you got any thoughts on this?
No, only that I think the other time that we have seen this level of targeting of relatives of a leader of a sovereign nation is in Syria, of course. The ramping up of sanctions against members of President Assad's family, whether they're living in Syria or abroad, has been a sort of recent tactic and strategy of the sanctions here. So I guess that, in a sense, set the precedent, and that's now being used against Putin and his close family and confidants.
Yes, indeed. Okay, thank you for that. Patrick, let's move on then to Sputnik. And of course, this morning, We had a look to see if we could see this article on Sputnik, and of course that's blocked, as we mentioned a couple of days ago.
In the UK,
Yes,
because
in
of
the UK.
sanctions.
Yes.
So yeah, the UK has sanctioned RT.com, Sputnik, and most major Russian state-affiliated media outlets. So here's one article, and we thought we'd put this up because it's incredibly brilliant, actually. This is an interview with an American academic who just happens to be from Russia. So let's take a look at Vladimir Goldstein here, who is really one of the brilliant humanist commentators here at Brown University, Ivy League school. That's Professor Vladimir Goldstein. And let's take a look at what he says. The whole idea of fake news or disinformation is highly dubious. Any complex event has a multitude of manifestations and causes. There is no single set of eyes that can see and register it all. As St. Paul observed, in the affairs of this world, we see through a glass darkly. Consequently, it is highly erroneous for one side to claim that they see clearly, whereas another side produces only fake news. And again, I just remind people, this is a brilliant comment. It's a great interview. If you're able to see it, however you're able to see it, we'll aim to republish this at 21st Century Wire. But he goes on here. Besides myopia and the self-defeated dimension of censorship, one should highlight two obvious facts related to censorship and dismissal of alternative interpretations as propaganda. And he goes on to basically explain this is a logical fallacy, the whole concept of disinformation. And again, you can't read this if you're living in the UK. It's been censored because according to the British government, anything on printed or visible on any of these Russian media outlets is Putin propaganda and dangerous disinformation, and somehow helping the war effort. And here you have one of the top academics in his field in the United States at an Ivy League institution in America who's being interviewed. So don't you think his opinion or his viewpoint is worth listening to?
Well, it's the wrong opinion, though, so of course it has to be shut down.
Well, it's not necessarily it's the wrong opinion per se, but they're saying it's being published at the wrong source. And I think this is hugely dangerous. We all know, Mike, this is a slippery slope.
It is.
It doesn't stop with Russian websites. Now they've opened this gate. They can keep going with pretty much any content at some point in the future that the state deems to be disinformation. Hugely dangerous. People need to think about that.
Liz Truss, of course, was in Germany at the G7 meeting and very concerned about disinformation and sanctions. She wants to see much more shutting down of what she would describe as pro-Russian narratives and many more sanctions. So she's calling on people to go further and faster in the G7. So let's just have a look at what she said after the meeting.
I'm here at the G7 in Germany. It's very important at this time that we keep up the pressure on Vladimir Putin by supplying more weapons to Ukraine, by increasing the sanctions. G7 unity has been vital during this crisis to protect freedom and democracy, and we'll continue to work together to do just that.
Alex, is she protecting freedom and democracy?
Sounds like a head girl's speech, doesn't it, Mike? No, is she the spokeswoman for the Foreign and Commonwealth and Development Office, or is she the spokeswoman for the G7? Has Britain actually, at this stage, captured the foreign and defence policies of these nations? It does increasingly look like, as we've been reporting in recent episodes, Britain is at general staff and political level talking about NATO being obsolete in Trumpian terms almost. Although they threw a hissy fit at the time when Trump said it first, and that they're proclaiming that NATO is too cautious, as David Scott coined last week on the show, too missile hesitant. So I don't know
and Alex,
what exactly
Alex, it's the hesitant word that's really important here. NATO's being hesitant, and this, of course, is invoking the whole COVID vaccine hesitancy trope and implying that NATO being a bit slow and hesitant are equivalent to people that are refusing to take the jab, for example.
Yes, and every policy vector that globalism has foisted upon the world, with Britain as its laboratory in recent years, has gone this way. We will recall the 2014 Scottish independence referendum, IndyRef 1, as it's now called, because there's constant maundering on about reruns of it. Only a third of the Scots actually want it. But at that stage, the slogan was not "Are you for independence?" but "You yes yet." That was actually in the wake of the narrow loss by the independence advocates. And now on Welsh Twitter, we see a lot of talk of the same thing. Just as people are being tempted into sexual perversion under the idea of being bi-curious, so now the skeptics about how a Welsh government would do independent are being invited to become independence curious. So you could also say that they're independence hesitant. The idea is that the plebs will come round to this way of thinking sooner or later. It's just a matter of how much psychological cajoling we have to apply.
So in order to deal with the hesitance, Britain seems to be going its own way, and we'll come on to Finland and Sweden in a second. But before we get to that, let's have a look and see what they are talking about with respect to US-EU defense cooperation.
Here is none other than the Massachusetts senior Senator Elizabeth Warren meeting the EU's ambassador to the United States, as this is being used as the image material for a piece in Defense News out of Washington entitled "The Pentagon Pitches Law Changes to Enable US-EU Defense Cooperation." Now, there's this small matter of the US Constitution and the Founding Fathers' warnings against foreign entanglements, which, of course, is very seriously respected, particularly by the Senate, the guardian of US foreign policy. And, of course, it comes from English constitutional history, because the armed forces since the Glorious Revolution have to be continually re-voted into existence. At least every year in the past, and now, alas, only once every quinquennium, every term. But anyway, the shocker here is that the US Department of Defense is actually circulating draft legislative material in the way that a lobbyist would in the past, and saying to the Congress, this is the language that we would like to see. So we'll see a bit of detail of that. So the covering slide there talks about enabling US-EU defense cooperation. And if we move that forward one, I'll do that. There we are. The United States, we're told, must be able to pursue information sharing and potential cooperative projects, i.e. they haven't been formed yet, with the European Union and member states of the EU to maintain blah, 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 reads the legislative proposal published on the Pentagon website. So, Mike and Pat, this is the executive proposing legislation in the country that champions the separation of powers perhaps more than any other. And we see that the document talks about potential procurement of articles or services. So in other words, this is unlawful as things stand in the United States. The proposal goes on, or rather the write-up goes on, that this congressional push, it isn't actually, it's a Pentagon push, essentially lays the domestic groundwork. This is the Defense News cover of it. It allows Washington to have a hand in the EU's emerging weapons development efforts. And of course, we see at the bottom a bit of noddy speak. The US is not a member of the EU, says the Pentagon. Just in case any Congress people and senators were unaware of this, you never know these days. Meanwhile, Defense News says work on a crucial pact between the Pentagon and the European Defense Agency remains unfinished. So they're supposed to have had an administrative arrangement between the Pentagon and the Triangle, Brussels fake Pentagon, basically, since last year, but it hasn't actually been signed yet. The hesitation was that the EU member states that still have serious domestic defense industries, notably France, were worried that any legislation and treaties that went through would force the Europeans to open themselves up to the Northrop Grummons and the Lockheed Martins of this world, the big American contractors that would take things over. So there we are. We're getting the US effectively being seen by the Pentagon now as a would-be candidate for European Defence Union. The mention of NATO in this, which was dominant, it was the cart before the horse, or rather the horse before the cart a few years ago. That's switched round now. The cart is before the horse, and all the talk is about EU defence, even when the US is involved, not NATO.
Yeah, Alex has brought up the main point here. It seems like the U.S. is hedging its bets here for the future. No one knows what the future of NATO is for certain, but EU defense is certainly on the horizon. When Alex said they're acting like lobbyists, he's absolutely right. They are lobbyists, behind the Pentagon is the military-industrial complex, the defense giants. And if you can see what they've done with the weapons into Ukraine, they're getting all of the European countries, especially Eastern European countries, to dump all of their old weapons into Ukraine and then backfill them with brand new state-of-the-art and ideally U.S. manufactured weapons. Those come with maintenance teams, technical teams, U.S. staff, like the Patriot missile system, for instance. That's all U.S. staff, technical teams, same in Israel as well. It's U.S. managed in Israel out of Stuttgart, Germany. And then also all the maintenance contracts going forward, the upgrades. So really the U.S. would have operational control over European defense if it was allowed to basically get the lion's share of that market.
But the point here is, or at least one point here is that this is all outside the auspices of NATO. And so what is going on with NATO? So Boris yesterday went to Finland and Sweden. Let's just have a look at what he had to say.
Today I've been seeing some of our closest Nordic friends and partners, Prime Minister Magdalena Andersson of Sweden and President Sauli Niinisto of Finland. And what we've signed are two solemn declarations about our mutual security and defence. And what these will enable us to do is, they're not only important commitments to come to each other's protection upon request in the event of attack, but they're also the foundation stones for us to create new defence and security partnerships, whether it's on tackling cyber warfare together, sharing more intelligence together, common defence procurement, more joint exercises. There is a huge range of things that we're now going to do together as Europe's security architecture changes, and it becomes ever more necessary for like-minded democracies to stand together to defend our values, to defend freedom, and make it clear that we will not accept anywhere the changing of boundaries in Europe by force.
So people in the chat box, once again, noticed the music, which is just, I mean, the level of depravity that we're seeing from number 10 Downing Street in the way that they're packaging this material at the moment, I just think it's despicable. But anyway, they're talking about joint expeditionary force. This is all outside NATO. So this is, Britain saying that we're going to come riding to the rescue of Sweden and Finland if through the auspices of this new agreement, and Sweden and Finland need to come and ride to our rescue if we get into trouble as well.
Entangling alliances.
Exactly. So this is all sort of pre-First World War kind of
power politics. That's
being built.
Yeah.
Okay, but in the meantime, Finnish leaders here are confirming support for NATO application. And remember that you heard it here first, folks, because we were making the point quite a number of weeks ago now that Ben Wallace and Boris Johnson and Liz Truss were all visiting at different times Sweden and Finland, really to drive forward the idea of them getting into NATO. But in the meantime, they haven't waited. They've gone ahead and set up these agreements. So anyway, Finland and Sweden looking like they're going to join NATO. The Russians, as you would expect, looking at this extremely carefully. And Alex, I wanted to get your thoughts on this because obviously Russia is not going to take this lying down. So just, what do you think the response is going to be from them?
Probably quite a logistical, quite a physical response of moving large numbers of troops and support equipment up to the northwest, and probably also quite a large naval and aerial response, given that this is two Scandinavian countries. I know Finland is not technically geographically Scandinavia, but in the Scandinavian area that in Finland's case have, neither of them have got Arctic Sea access, but it provides more bulk for Norway, which does have Arctic Sea access, to form a bridgehead, really, against Russia in the Murmansk Sea area. I would note on the language as well that Johnson was carefully briefed to stress the words solemn declaration. As usual, when novel words are inserted, it's not an instrument of international law. The hierarchy is there's a convention, a treaty, a protocol, and an accord. Those four are international law instruments. A declaration, a memorandum, or a pact, if it's multilateral, are not known to international law. They're just people playing around.
Okay, thank you for that. Well, as we said, obviously Finland and Sweden looking at joining NATO. So the whole argument from Russia about encirclement starts to look a bit more valid than maybe the argument from NATO that it was not true doesn't seem to stack up anymore. But of course, who's next on the list? That's going to be China. And the NATO 2030 agenda is very much looking at the South China Sea and China. But we start to see headlines like this, Patrick, and it's looking like the same kind of game is being played by the West with respect to China. So this is the Asia Times, and the headline is "Eye on China, South Korea joins NATO Cyber Defense Unit." And here we've got the Japan Times, Japan to attend NATO summit in June. And in both these cases, there are hints that those two countries in particular, South Korea and China, are very, very interested in joining NATO in the shorter term.
Well, more likely, we're looking at Taiwan as being the sort of the main set piece
right.
There, and they'd love to create the casus belli of Taiwan and turn it as part of the Article 5 trap, the Article 5 war trap. That's what Article 5 has basically become. It's been weaponized by NATO member states now. And when we say NATO, let's be honest, we're talking about the United States and Britain, and everybody else is really along for the ride and will sort of do what they're told. Yes, sir, 3 bags full. That's what NATO is. And so that's the way to look at this, is a provocative action by NATO, because of course, as Alex pointed out very astutely, this is all done outside of international law. When has NATO ever acted in accordance to any international law? I cannot remember a time when it actually did.
Indeed. So let's talk about NATO and exercises and joint readiness and all this kind of thing. Let's put this on screen. So here's a nice image from the Ministry of Defence this morning. This is North Macedonia. We've got some more images because they were the Pathfinders were the first in taking part in this exercise. It's going to be 3,500 soldiers altogether, 6 NATO countries training together in North Macedonia. And this these images here coming from 16th Air Assault Brigade Combat Team, who are making these so-called halo jumps as the first steps in the exercises. So that's that. But what we have here, and we have a little bit of video here to just sort of top this this little section off. So if we have a look at the video number 2, that's the one. Let's have a look at this, because just listen to the language that's being used on Good Morning Britain here.
This major NATO exercise during the summer isn't just about the paras, it's about displaying power to leaders like Putin. Helicopters dropping heavy artillery, attacking with American Apaches, and with thousands of ground troops. This was all watched by the North Macedonia president, no doubt Sweden and Finland, who are considering joining NATO.
We're showing off to Putin. We're demonstrating our power to Putin. Putin must be shaking in his boots, but nonetheless.
I was impressed by the press tent. Pims and lemonade on the side with the canapes. Very nice. Nice day out. Very impressive.
Yes, indeed. In the meantime, in Romania, French and Polish, there's a NATO multinational battle group has been formed in Romania. This is one of 4 new multinational battle groups, one in Bulgaria, one in Hungary, one in Romania, and one in Slovakia. And this, of course, is all about de-escalating. Patrick, I'm being sarcastic, as you'll appreciate, because every time we start pushing, creating new battle groups right on Russia's borders, holding exercises, whether it be in North Macedonia or Romania or wherever it happens to be, this is all about trying to maintain pressure with Russia. And of course, the problem here is, what possible response can Russia have other than to, push back?
I think there's a lot of this is noise, Mike. We're in a sort of the noise mode constantly. They need to be doing something. Look, the NATO countries, mainly led by the U.S. and Britain, are so deeply invested, and they've dragged all of the European countries in with them. They're so deeply invested in this. They need, for public appearances, they need to keep doing things. They need to look like that they're somehow winning, or that they could potentially change the course of this conflict. And the more we look at it, we showed you that map at the beginning of the program. Russia has just increased the area in which it's holding there. And the longer this conflict goes on, the longer the West tells Zelensky, don't negotiate, and the longer people like Josep Borrell in the EU say there will be no peace, this has to be won militarily, that means that Ukraine is going to lose more and more territory over time because the security calculus changes over time, and also the people living in those areas, their priorities will change as well. You effectively have a failed state in Kiev. The institutions of that country have failed. They've lost a tremendous amount of sovereignty right now, and it seems like all of their military and political operations are being micromanaged by Western countries. Okay, that's a fact, and that has massive ramifications in the long run when you're talking about, where these territories belong. Can they be repatriated back to Ukraine? I'm afraid they can't, and they will lose more the longer they carry on with this policy of fight down to the last Ukrainian.
Okay, and where does that leave Ukraine with respect to the EU then?
Well, this is the big carrot, isn't it? This is the big hope. And a lot of what Ukraine is in the Western mind is it's all about selling hope, the dream, the Maidan, the Euromaidan. And so here's this comment you might have seen, everybody's seen. Macron, and he's not alone, others have said it's going to take a long time for Ukraine. You can't have this fast track system of membership. And by the way, what's left of Ukraine, if they leave this war status quo right now to go on for another 8, 10, 12 months, you might see half of the country remaining without a coastline along the Black Sea. So here's Macron saying this. Now, this didn't go over very well, as you can imagine, in Kiev. And then this happened just a couple of days ago. Ukraine cuts off Russian natural gas pipelines supplying Europe. So the transit pipelines, they've shut it down. This was not done by Russia, despite what some Western media outlets are reporting and injecting in the fake news talking points that somehow Russia's done this. Ukraine claims that it's because these areas can't be staffed because of the conflict. But when you look at where the transit areas are, Mike, they're not in the middle of conflict zones. There's no reason why, and this isn't the first time Ukraine's done this, by the way. This happened previously, I believe, in 2014 and 2015. And so that threw their relationship into turmoil, and they tried to patch it up recently, and then they have the gas flowing, and now they've gone and done this. Is this Kiev's retribution to Europe?
For not providing weapons fast enough, you mean?
For not providing weapons, or saying that they're not going to get their EU or NATO membership fast-tracked? I mean, you're dealing with a desperate regime right now in Kiev, and just take a look at some of the statements that they've made recently, and this is going to make matters worse. Russia has just, apologies, RT.com, this is Russian disinformation, full disclaimer for everybody, and this is banned in Britain. But we think it's important to show because this is the actual state position of the government of the Russian Federation. So this is the problem with censorship, again, is it keeps the public from being fully informed. So we're going to inform you here. Russia's changed its position on Ukraine's EU bid. Mike, this is massive. And they've done so really in reaction to a number of statements, including from Borrell, from the EU himself, saying that there's only a military solution to this conflict. So before, Russia said, whoa, no, NATO's a non-starter, you've got to be a neutral country, but we don't necessarily have a problem with EU membership in the future. They've now changed their position on this. This is big, okay? So this means that they're looking at the EU, they might even be looking ahead at European defense configurations as well, and that could be just as much
as they should be
of a threat to Russian security as NATO is. So this is big. So this changes the calculus. Where's the hope and change for the people of Ukraine? If you take away these dreams on the horizon that the West have constantly been selling the people in Ukraine, and the Eurovision, as it were, no pun intended, that's tomorrow, the Eurovision Song Contest.
And who's going to win that?
Ukraine's a 2-5 favorite.
I would have thought so.
So big money, odds on Ukraine's going to win. So this is big. So where is this going to leave Ukraine's future? A, what's left of Ukraine, and B, what can they sell? What dream can they sell to the people of that country from the West? It's very unclear right now.
Yes. So that takes us then on to Zelensky himself.
Well, here he is. Apologies. It just happened to pause on this part of the video when we took the screenshot. He's upset. He's claiming here, this sounds familiar, it reminds me of Syria. Zelensky's claiming Russia has destroyed 570 healthcare facilities. That's almost as many hospitals that are in Idlib, by the way. I'm joking. And so Zelensky's saying that in addition to this, 101 hospitals have been completely destroyed by the Russian Federation. Probably Vanessa might be able to weigh in on this particular topic.
Absolutely. So I'm going to get Vanessa to comment on this in 1 second. But what the point here is, we have claims that hospitals are being destroyed and so on. But the problem is that we've got military operations happening in these locations. And we've got the military using civilian infrastructure effectively as a shield. Now, I just wanted to bring this on screen because this was a tweet that Elon Musk put out a couple of days ago, saying that he had received this message from the Russian, I think this was the Russian head of the Russian Space Agency, the head of the Russian Space Agency, rather. And so we'll just do a quick translation on this. From the testimony of the captured commander of the 36th Marine Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Colonel Dmitry Kormenkov, it turns out that the internet terminals of Elon Musk's Starlink satellite company were delivered to the militants of the Nazi Azov battalion and the Ukrainian Marines in Mariupol by military helicopters. According to our information, the delivery of the Starlink equipment was carried out by the Pentagon. Elon Musk thus is involved in supplying the fascist forces in Ukraine with military communication equipment. And for this, Elon, you will be held accountable like an adult, no matter how much you'll play the fool. Elon Musk then tweeted out afterwards saying that the use of the word Nazi was inappropriate or not quite accurate in this case. But he also said this, that there are no angels in war. So he seems to be justifying the fact that Starlink equipment has been given to Azov.
That's an admission.
It seems to be.
I would read it as an admission.
Yes.
By Elon Musk.
And he went on then later on to tweet this: "If I die under mysterious circumstances, it's been nice knowing you." So he's implying that he's at risk as a result of the fact that the Russians have found this out. But the point I want to make here is that, of course, we've been talking on a number of occasions about Britain's equivalent of Starlink, which is satellite swarms launched by OneWeb, which is UK government owned. And the comment from Ben Wallace saying, "We will ensure that we embed dual use at the heart of our capability management processes, considering how we share defence space capabilities and outputs." And this is UK government policy now to use civilian infrastructure for military purposes. This is why, one of the reasons anyway, why Huawei has been denied access to sell their products into the UK's 5G networks, because the British government intends to use the UK's 5G networks for military and intelligence services use, as well as obviously civilian communications.
Dual use is the key.
Dual use.
That's the key word, dual use.
This policy has been discussed for many, many years. We've talked about this. This is November 2015, when Federica Mogherini and Jens Stoltenberg were at the European Defence Agency conference. We're talking about the merging of civilian and military infrastructure. And then in 2017, a couple of years later, here's Rose Gottmuller from NATO talking in 2017, we need to break down the silos between military and civilian institutions. And this, again, part of the UK's integrated operating concept, because they're talking about, we'll come on to this in a second, but before we come on to this, Vanessa, the point here is that we have seen on the ground in Syria and in Ukraine the use of civilian infrastructure by military combatants of some kind, and we've got the policy coming through the British government and through the EU and NATO of merging civilian and military infrastructures. And in those circumstances, then everybody becomes a target. It's no longer possible for any military force to target only military forces on the opposing side, because they're occupying civilian spaces.
Yeah, absolutely. There was a meme that I actually put out on Twitter, which was called the Nazi sandwich, which showed that in an apartment block at the bottom you would have, for example, their heavy artillery, then you would have a layer of civilian residents, then another layer maybe of snipers, and this would go on to the roof, where of course then you would also have snipers. This same policy was deployed in Syria, as Patrick quite rightly pointed out. And of course, this wonderful hyperbole over the number of hospitals in a specific area. As you mentioned in Idlib, I think I did a survey on the actual documentation of public and private hospitals in Idlib, and it was a tiny percentage of those that were being claimed by the White Helmets. And considering the fact that the White Helmets, the Syria White Helmets, are providing assistance and information management advice to Ukraine, one can expect Zelensky to be exaggerating numbers of hospitals and civilian infrastructure that have been damaged by the Russian forces.
Yes, thanks for that. And Patrick, then coming back to Elon Musk for a second, and Azovstal.
Well, the Azovstal plant, this is where the holdouts are, and so we can assume that they've been aided by Elon Musk's company Starlink with the technology for various usage, you could say. So here's one of the militants here. This is Sergei Volin. We showed you a call sign Kalinia last week with the beard, and this is another character here. He's calling out to Elon Musk to invoke his better angels, as it were, or they're looking for Elon as their guardian angel. Let's take a look at this tweet here. This is Volin. He's saying, Elon Musk, people say you come from another planet to teach people to believe in the impossible. Our planets are next to each other, as I live where it is nearly impossible to survive. Help us get out of Azovstal to a mediating country, third-party country he means. If not you, then who? Give me a hint. And so he's tweeting out here. So they're living in this bizarre postmodernist world where militants, and particularly the Azov battalions, are victims of warfare. Yes. So they've refused to surrender. They've been offered green corridors constantly over the last almost going on 2 months now in total. They've had the opportunity. They've chosen not to. Okay, so now that they're calling out to the international community, help us exfiltrate from this this nightmare, because otherwise we're going to serve prison time for war crimes by the DPR, Donetsk People's Republic, for instance. So here's another one here. He went on to Sky. This is he's got the eye patch, sort of the more hipster look. He's getting a lot of airtime in UK media. Ilya Samolyenko. Okay, and he's quite erudite, very well spoken. So the media is trying to basically turn him into a type of a representative or a mascot for the Azov battalions stranded at Mariupol. So what they're doing here is creating a narrative. They're creating mythology, and this is absolutely necessary in order to sell this conflict to the West. This happens within the Western media sphere, okay, much like Bana of Aleppo. And people like this were used, all these caricatures and avatars were created during the Syrian conflict to keep the support coming, to keep the politicians on point in the West, to keep the arms flowing, keep the money and the NGOs and all the various third sector projects they've had going. So again, they're trying this, and it's failing. I think it's really failing miserably. Because everybody knows it's war, unfortunately, and you either surrender or you're going to fight to the death. Zelensky, Kiev has says their orders of don't surrender. So they're clearly trying to, and they're using the term martyr now. So they're trying to create martyrs here. For what? What's the payoff going to be? Loss of territory for Kiev.
Well, one of the other players in Syria, of course, very much pushing the propaganda game was the White Helmets, Vanessa. And last week when you were on, you were highlighting the efforts to create, White Helmets potentially in other parts, in Ukraine, and in other parts of the world. But you highlighted this particular article, and this was about Macer Gifford, and the headline was "Former Fighter in Syria Launches Medical Mission to Treat Victims in Ukraine." That sounds like a very positive headline, but the headline changed following your appearance on UK Column News.
Yeah, if you can put up the new one where it actually says, I think, British mercenary plans White Helmets operation for Ukraine. So that came up almost immediately after the UK Column News. So I'm guessing somebody was watching and altered the headline to be a lot more truthful, actually.
But calling it an operation in that way is changes the slant of the article completely, because the original headline was very positive. That implies something quite different.
Well, I mean, and also it implied, this kind of maverick guy, as Patrick was saying, these cartoon characters was heading off to Ukraine to set up an organization, grassroots organization, to help the victims of the Ukrainian war. And of course, that automatically means the victims of the Russian invasion. And then changing it to British mercenary, which has a more negative slant, and White Helmet Operation. So, clearly kind of aligning itself with our report saying that this is a British Foreign Office and intelligence and security agencies operation being repeated inside Ukraine.
Yes, okay, thank you for that. Now let's move on to
On the subject, the unsavory subject of mercenaries.
Right.
Stranded in there, Ukrainian Foreign Legion. Here's the latest. Here, we'll put this up on screen. This is one gentleman here, and he's come and speaking to the press. He's back, apparently. I guess he survived the nightmare in Ukraine. It was a suicide mission, says this British mercenary. Life on the front lines for foreign fighters in Ukraine. According to Matthew Robinson, a UK mercenary from the Georgian National Legion, approximately 70% of the foreign mercenaries who came to Ukraine have already returned. So the dream has faded, apparently, for 70%, or they've just, the pennies dropped, the light bulb's gone off, and they've realized that it's not really a good endeavor. Let's look at what else he says. And here's the key bit, Mike. They are being sent on suicidal attacks without proper weapons or uniforms, probably, or equipment. We heard stories of them buying their own ammunition, not equipped, and basically cannon fodder.
Yeah.
Especially the foreigners. So I guess the word's getting around. So that's the latest on that. There's quite a few of these British personalities that have come into the press, either on our side of the lines or who have been captured. One of those who's been captured is this gentleman here. His name is Andrew Hill, British mercenary in Ukraine. He's in the Donetsk People's Republic, so he's captured by the DPR here. He's made these videos. This is Rudenko, one of the Russian independent or affiliated, I guess, with the media. And
so Alex did show one of the videos that was made with him.
Yeah, there's a couple of interviews
yes.
he's done. So, you could say, was the interview under duress? It's difficult to know, but he seems sincere. I've looked at other commentators that said they believe that he is sincere.
Right.
However, as a mercenary, he may not be covered under Geneva Conventions as a proper combatant. And again, that's a legal distinction that would have to be fleshed out ultimately in some kind of a court of law if it's going to be challenged. So here's the problem with this, though. Andrew Hill might face the death penalty. Now, what does that mean in terms of how the British government would react to that, how the British public would react to that, how our media, what sort of story our media could conjure through a situation like that? Would that be good or bad for generally for the proxy war effort that the UK government has committed to the country to so far? The US has done the same. There's other countries that have also, wink and a nod, sent foreign fighters in there as well. So let's take a look at, this is, I believe, the ombudsman for the Donetsk People's Republic, Daria Morozova. Let's listen to what she has to say just for a minute here, and she'll explain the legal problem here that he's facing.
Значит, да, действительно, сейчас на территории Донецкой Народной Республики задержан подданный Великобритании Эндрю Хилл, который приехал сюда в качестве наемника со стороны Украины. К сожалению, это не первый случай. Это было и в 2014 году, и в последующих годах, и, соответственно, уже с началом операции. А вот на данный момент ему предъявлены обвинения, ему избрана мера пресечения в виде содержания под стражей. Далее, после завершения всех следственных мероприятий, дело будет передано в суд, после чего будет уже приговор скорее всего, обвинительный, поскольку он признался в очень страшных совершенных преступлениях, и будет уже назначено наказание. Согласно национальному законодательству Донецкой Народной Республики, все, кто задерживается, все, кто обвиняются, либо уже осуждены, они могут обратиться в адрес уполномоченного по правам человека. Помимо этого, как и я, как уполномоченный, и аппарат уполномоченного мониторит их права в местах содержания под стражей, либо колониях, либо ИВС, СИЗО и так далее. Вот. И, соответственно, это распространяется на всех тех граждан, которые сейчас находятся на территории Донецкой Народной Республики. Хочу подчеркнуть, что Донецкая Народная Республика на протяжении 8 лет выстраивала свое правовое государство, и мы двигаемся только в направлении с нашим национальным законодательством. Это и Конституция Донецкой Народной Республики, и Уголовно-процессуальный кодекс Донецкой Народной Республики. Он регламентирует все правоотношения между нами, как властями, правоохранительными органами, так и теми людьми, которые задержаны на нашей территории. Поэтому все права, согласно нашим нормативно-правовым актам, будут соблюдены с его стороны. Ну, это, конечно, срок наказания, это больше вопрос к судебной системе, потому что будет разбирательство, опять же, будет назначен бесплатный адвокат. Если господин Эндрю Хилл захочет какого-то другого адвоката, он не лишен права нанять абсолютно любого юриста, правозащитника, который будет отстаивать его права. В зависимости от тех статей, которые ему предъявили сейчас, мера наказания может быть от 15 лет до высшей меры наказания.
Okay, 15 years to capital punishment. There will be a trial.
There will be a trial. So I think this is going to generate a lot of media interest and attention in Britain.
And in Plymouth in particular.
Yeah, and in Plymouth as well. So this is going to be very controversial. This could spark some kind of a diplomatic situation. Certainly there's a chance for some trade or some, bilateral negotiations between the DPR and Britain on this. That's a possibility too. We'll see.
Well, it depends whether Liz Truss feels any obligation to try to help any of these people.
Well, since you brought up Liz Truss, Foreign Secretary, she does bear some of the responsibility for this situation of so many British mercenaries going to Ukraine, because wasn't it Liz Truss who said that the state has got their back? I think have we got that clip?
Yeah, we've got that clip.
Let's roll that clip. Listen to this.
President Zelensky has asked for people from abroad to join an international force. Would you support that?
I do support that, and of course that is something that people can make their own decisions about. But they are fighting. The people of Ukraine are fighting for freedom and democracy, not just for Ukraine, but for the whole of Europe, because that is what President Putin is challenging. And absolutely, if people want to support that struggle, I would support them in doing that.
So you support people from Britain going over to Ukraine to help in the fight?
Absolutely, if that's what they want to do.
Well, so that's absolutely clear.
I was just going to say, is Alex or Vanessa want to comment on that? To Alex first.
Yeah.
Foreign viewers and younger viewers won't get this reference, but that Liz Truss should perhaps have put on a big bushy black Irish beard and said in the Gerry Adams accent, support the armed struggle, and then we got right back to the 1980s. Except when that happened, Adams's words had to be voiced over by an actor.
Yes,
Yeah, I remember that.
Indeed. Alex, your audio's a bit ropey there, so if you'd like to reconnect, if possible. Vanessa, have you got any thoughts?
No, I mean, just when I first saw Liz Truss basically sanction mercenaries going to Ukraine, I mean, it conjured up all sorts of legal entanglements that the British government was opening itself to, because I don't know how that works legally. I mean, effectively, they have said they will support mercenaries that don't come under the Geneva Convention. So I'm not quite sure to what lengths the British government is going to go to take care of those mercenaries that have quite legitimately been arrested by members of the Donetsk People's Republic.
Yes.
I don't think you can walk that back. That's the top minister in the government saying that, and they've walked it back, or they've tried to walk it back, saying, actually, no, we changed our mind. But by that time, people have already self-deployed. So I mean, I'm afraid that one she's going to have to own, and so is the government.
Yes. Now, very briefly, let's have a look at what's going on with Wimbledon, because Wimbledon, one of the biggest tennis tournaments in the world, has issued a statement. Well, this is back on the 20th of April. Statement regarding Russian and Belarusian individuals at the championships in 2022. And so they said that on behalf of the All England Club and Committee of Management of the championships, we wish to express our ongoing support for those impacted by the conflict in Ukraine. And they went on to say that in the circumstances of such unjustified and unprecedented military aggression, it would be unacceptable for the Russian regime to derive any benefits from the involvement of Russian and Belarusian players in the championships. But unfortunately, this has gone badly for them. because people tweeting out yesterday or today, no, sorry, a couple of days ago, that is, Wimbledon is expected to receive all ranking points removed by the ATP in the next 48 hours if it does not reverse the ban on Russian players. And all over the media, actually, over the last day or two, is this story. But nonetheless, Ukrainian tennis attempted to turn that round because the players have decided, the ATP has decided that to support the Russian and Belarusian players, but the Ukrainian tennis authorities decided that this was in fact them supporting Russia. So Russian Tennis Federation president thanked all the top tennis players supporting the players from Russia amid the Wimbledon ban. He also said Ukraine's number one is absolutely nobody. So they were very upset about this. But nonetheless, the point here is, Patrick, that this is the players supporting other players and saying that this action, this unilateral action by Wimbledon, is unacceptable. And I think that's a very interesting pushback.
It is. So what Wimbledon did as a tournament, Mike, they went ahead and on their own, thinking that they've got the government and the states back, is let's ban and cancel all Russian and Belarusian players. And a lot of players have stepped up, Novak Djokovic, and I believe Rafael Nadal, and possibly Roger Federer. They haven't made their positions completely public, but it's understood from sources that all of the top players support the interests of all players. In other words, they're not interested in the war, they're not interested in the politics or the policy of the NATO member states. They're supporting their fellow players.
Yes.
So they're not taking the Russophobic, racist position that some states are and that organizations like Wimbledon are, which is basically completely hysterical and reactionary. And guess what? It's going to backfire on them. If they lose their points and their ranking for that tournament, it will be relegated from a Grand Slam tournament down to an exhibition match. That's what Wimbledon's looking at. So to me, this is one of those diplomatic straws that could eventually, one of those ripples that could turn into a wave, Mike. The players have shown that the way forward, these athletes, these high-profile athletes have shown the way forward, and now the pressure and the onus is going to be on our ministers and members of government who have been all gung-ho about the war, and they want to fight the war down to the last Ukrainian. They now have to answer these players, because these players also represent, I think, the views of a lot of people as well. So I think this is huge. This is, to me, this is the first real impasse that we have seen on this with any major institution in the West.
Indeed. Okay, well, let's have a look at over the United States and money and arms going to Ukraine from there.
Yeah, 40 billion. So, homeless skyrocketing in the U.S., food shortages, but there's 40 billion for Zelensky in Ukraine. But guess what? Rand Paul blocked it yesterday. So temporarily, he's blocking the legislation. He wants to appoint a special auditor to go through everything with a fine-tooth comb to make sure they're not just dumping pallets of cash into Kiev and it goes into the proverbial black hole. Let's listen to what Rand Paul says here and why he justified his decision.
If this gift to Ukraine passes, our total aid to Ukraine will almost equal the entire military budget of Russia. And it's not as if we have that money lying around. We will have to borrow that money from China to send it to Ukraine. The cost of this package we are voting on today is more than the U.S. spent during the first year of the U.S. conflict in Afghanistan. Congress authorized force, and the president sent troops into the conflict. The same cannot be said of Ukraine. This proposal towers over domestic priorities as well. My oath of office is to the U.S. Constitution, not to any foreign nation. And no matter how sympathetic the cause, my oath of office is to the national security of the United States of America. We cannot save Ukraine by dooming the U.S. economy. In March, inflation hit a 40-year high. Gasoline alone is up 48%, and energy prices are up 32%.
Hard to argue with any of that.
Yeah.
So come the moment comes the man. Rand Paul is stepping up. So what's this going to mean? It could get delayed. Okay, this funding tranche has bipartisan support. Just put this into perspective. Israel gets about $4 billion a year in U.S. cash for military aid. That's like a decade of money and weapons for someone like Israel.
Yeah.
No one's ever seen this level of assistance and aid. So really, they're asking the American people to prosecute a war against Russia using Ukraine as a proxy. Rand Paul, hopefully this will inspire other people to do the same.
Step up.
So we'll put this story up on screen here, and so we'll read the headline to you. Russia looking forward to picking up $40 billion in new equipment after U.S. abandons Ukraine. Now you might be thinking that's a bit of an outrageous headline, and you know what? I wish it was satire, Mike. I wish it was satire. Is it satire?
Well, you tell me. So I would say probably not, because isn't that what they did in Afghanistan?
Exactly. That's exactly what I think. Maybe a little more than 40 billion. Was it the 70 billion?
I'm not sure.
The Taliban got a
big amount, yes.
nice windfall for the Taliban. But no, this is the Babylon Bee. But just shows you how difficult it's getting to distinguish between satire and what's real.
Yeah, it will indeed. Okay, Vanessa, let's bring you back on, and let's have a look at what's going on with respect to trafficking of people and children in particular in Ukraine. We've actually lost Vanessa.
Reconnect.
Hopefully she will reconnect. But well, okay, we'll skip forward then, and oh, she's back. Excellent.
Sorry.
So, yeah. Oh, okay. So anyway, look, we want to have a quick conversation about inter-country adoption and trafficking of children out of Ukraine then.
Yeah. I mean, basically, what I've looked at very quickly, because of course, one of the major operations that are ongoing, particularly in conflict areas, are organ trafficking, child trafficking, and human trafficking generally. And I've been looking initially into previous inter-country adoption reports on Ukraine in particular. This was published in July 2021, but it was actually relating to 2020. This was produced by the US State Department, introduced with a letter from Antony Blinken himself, talking about if we go forward to the inter-country adoption. Now, inter-country adoption is considered particularly by, there's an NGO called Against Child Trafficking, which was established by Rolly Post, who had investigated previously the inter-country adoption of orphans from Romania. And of course, what they object to is the fact that children are treated as commodities, one. Two, it then impedes the establishment of a social security structure in the country of origin, because of course then it's focused on a supply and demand market for children, effectively, hence the fact that children become commodities. And effectively, they are unprotected in many cases. So when we look at the adoptions already in 2020, Korea and India and China are quite high on the list, South Korea. But from Ukraine, the highest number of adoptions, 192 finalized abroad. So this is not necessarily to the US, but 19 arrived in the US, in other words, were finalized in 2021, between 2020 and 2021. If you can go forward to the next one, Mike. So let's look at Blinken's letter. Dear reader, every child needs and deserves a permanent, loving family. But of course, this denies the fact that what is best for the children, according to many experts in this field, is that they remain in their own culture, in their own country of origin, and they are taken care of there through systems that will enable them to flourish in the same way as being adopted by a foreign family. The Department of State recognizes that for many children around the world, family reunification or domestic adoption may not be possible, but it doesn't explain why that would not be possible. So he goes on to basically promote inter-country adoption, which for the reasons I've mentioned, and that are gone into in greater depth by the Organization Against Child Trafficking, ACT. And he talks about, he talks about the Hague Convention, which effectively supports this idea of inter-country adoption if we continue. So what he then talks about is the fact that under the COVID measures that came into effect in 2020, unfortunately, in his parlance, the entire process of intercountry adoptions was interrupted, and many families awaiting children in the United States, for example, were disappointed. He then goes on to talk about overcoming travel restrictions in a number of countries, including Ukraine, and the departure of 4 adopted children to the US. And he talks about, due to close cooperation between the US Embassy in Kiev, Ukrainian border guard officials, and ASP local staff, and utilizing a department chartered repatriation flight. So he put on special flights basically for these children to be taken out under COVID restrictions, and special flights organized by Ukrainian airline. These children arrived to meet their adoptive parents waiting in the United States. So he violated COVID travel restrictions effectively, which were at their strictest at the beginning of 2020. And then this is, I'll just quickly refer to my notes here. This is a newsletter put out by the International Reference Center for the Rights of Children deprived of their family. Of course, it doesn't go into any details about why those children are deprived of their family. And again, ACT will argue that quite often parents are persuaded or incentivized to release their children for adoption. Now, in this report from this organization, they talk about the fact that Ukraine has one of the largest populations of children in residential care. In 2020, there were over 700 institutions run by different ministries, with a total of 102,570 children in residential care, nearly half of them having special needs. It goes on to say, in light of the conflict, these figures raise questions, and it's questions that everybody should be raising. Where and with whom are these children now? So clearly there is a disappearance of children going on as a result of or because of the conflict. Within the report, again, they go on to talk about, while this major and unprepared movement across borders, the largest since World War II, has called on rapid response in terms of protection, support, identification, registration, and reunification, it has also raised numerous legal and practical questions, ranging from providing humanitarian relief to ensuring that, despite good intentions, no harm is being done in compliance with international humanitarian law, hence upholding the rights of children, especially those who are deprived, again, this strange language, who are deprived of parental care. Why are they deprived of parental care? What measures have been brought to bear upon those parents, as I said, to release those children for adoption? And it says, for several weeks there was unclarity and lack of information about children still or formerly in the Ukrainian care system. So again, we have an inference that children are going missing in conflict, as well as children who were in adoption processes prior to the outburst of the conflict, and children who were about to be born to surrogate mothers in Ukraine. So this gives us also an indication of the adoption industry that is going on in Ukraine prior to the conflict, and now what is happening as a result of the conflict, although of course this is something that we've seen throughout history when the US coalition has incited wars in sovereign nations, we start to see this disappearance of children. And then we come on to very early in the Russian operation. There was an announcement in the Chabad Lubavitch. Of course, Chabad Lubavitch is one of the most ultra-Orthodox Jewish cults, I will call it, in Ukraine. Maybe Alex can sort of hop in on this. Funded largely, or their operations are funded largely by Kolomoisky, who of course established Zelensky and funds the Azov battalion. And his Privat Bank, which was used for money laundering, connected, of course, to Burisma Holdings and Hunter Biden, is what has effectively empowered Chabad Lubavitch, that has 10,000 emissaries across 100 countries globally. Some people will say that Chabad Lubavitch schools are dangerous areas, they're cultish organizations that are used to brainwash the children that are brought into these institutions. And very early on in the conflict, as I said, we saw Chabad Lubavitch taking children from an orphanage in Odessa to Germany, traveling through, I think it was 7 countries to arrive there. So for me, although I can't categorically say this is child trafficking, it must raise some questions about why children are being taken from orphanages in Ukraine that were not under direct attack to Germany very, very early on in the conflict, sorry, and why there are these questions being raised about the disappearance of children.
Yeah, and Alex, do you have any thoughts on what Vanessa just said?
Well, hoping that my microphone is normal.
Sorry, Alex, we can't hear you at all at the moment. So I don't know whether you want to try to reconnect.
I will change the sound.
Yeah, well, look, we're gonna have to move on with that. We'll come back to Alex's next point in a second. But Vanessa, let's just move to Syria now, and what's going on in the northeast of the country, because this is really falling under the radar, I think, in the UK at least.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's falling under everyone's radar, I think. This was just a little report put out in Reuters. US to allow foreign investment in northeast Syria without sanctions. The acting Assistant Secretary of State, Victoria Nuland, who of course had no small role to play in the 2014 US-UK Israeli managed coup in Ukraine, is talking about lifting or creating a license to lift the sanctions on particularly reconstruction projects and agricultural projects. They do claim that the oil industry is not included in these licenses, but I mean, it's hardly as if they need to. The oil is already under their occupation. Syrian oil is under their occupation. And of course, it's being traded by their various proxies, including ISIS, the Kurdish Contras, and Al-Qaeda that are processing the oil. So what is this? It's talking about reconstruction and it's talking about agriculture. So effectively, this is settlement by proxy in northeast Syria, which of course is in line with Zionist plans to take the territory east of the Euphrates. But the worrying thing is the license has also been approved for Turkish militia, which are dominated and controlled by Al-Qaeda in the northern border territories, which sort of are neighboring the areas controlled by the Kurdish Contras. So here we have effectively settlement, annexation of Syrian territory, so annexation of the territory of a sovereign nation, while they are claiming that Russia is invading a sovereign nation that has been a vassal state of NATO member states since 2014, if not before. But here they are effectively, as I said, annexing Syrian territory that they already illegally occupy and enabling the building of settlements on that territory that has been ethnically cleansed by US proxies, whether it is ISIS, the Kurdish Contras, or the Turkish-backed militia, euphemistically called the Free Syrian Army, but which we know are under the control of Al-Qaeda and affiliates.
Yeah, any thoughts?
No, just back to a quick question for Vanessa, just back to the Ukrainian child trafficking story. Vanessa, do you think it's feasible or possible that the wave of refugees going over the border into Poland, that was just seen by traffickers as a great opportunity to move as many kids, or, under the cover of this refugee crisis, maybe?
I think you always have to look at refugee crises through this prism. You know, we know that those that, let's say, support child trafficking, whether it is legalized under intercountry adoptions or legitimized, or whether it is criminal child trafficking, human trafficking, it is facilitated by open borders. And as soon as you have a refugee crisis, of course, the calls come in for open borders. There are far less checks of children entering alone without adult supervision, without their parents and without their family. And we know from the Syrian conflict that huge numbers of children have gone missing, for example, in Germany, which made me immediately suspicious when I saw that these orphans were being transported, when at that point, actually, Odessa was not under attack as such. And yet it was considered for their safety to remove them from Ukraine and take them to Germany and put them into the Chabad Lubavitch schools there. So yeah, I mean, I think you at least have to be asking those questions.
Yes. Okay. Thank you for that, Alex. Let's see whether this is working now. Ian Davis has a new article up on the UK Column website.
Yes, I'm hoping that the microphone is now back to normal, and Ian Davis has just published, though superstitious might not like the dateline of Friday the 13th, but he has, or rather we have just published his previously submitted article, a long-form article asking the question of the last couple of months, really, since the late spring or early spring Russian offensive began. Does Ukraine need to be denazified? The image that we've taken as stock photo for the article is way back in 2014 during the Euromaidan revolution or coup or revolution of dignity, if you are with the on-message Western media crowd. And that is some gentlemen who are tooled up at the Maidan Independence Square in Kiev, holding the red and black with white lettering banner of the right sector, Pravy Sector, and the trident logo in the middle, which is very similar to the Ukrainian national coat of arms. Ian is really taking a tour at just the right level of detail for newcomers to the subject, but connoisseurs will also be interested here, of what's been going on since the Second World War. And in that, he has really recapitulated what he has said to a number of good interviewers. If I'm not mistaken, he has, among others, appeared on TNT Radio's excellent Jesse Zurawell, who has a show called Dispatches. So that's well worth catching up on. He's talking about the better-known period at the beginning of this Ukrainian ultranationalist movement in the early stages of the Second World War under the leadership of Stepan Bandera. So this is where the accurate insult of Banderites comes from. He talks about the massacre of Jews, just harking back to what Vanessa said, by the way, and then as now, there have been some ultra-Orthodox Jews or those claiming that cover who are perfectly content to see their co-religionists die for some greater cause. Well, in those days, it was the Lviv ghetto that was subjected to pogroms. In fact, it wasn't even a ghetto by that stage. The Jews of Lviv were well integrated, and it was the precursors of today's Ukrainian Nazis who liquidated them, threatening in a pamphlet, "We will lay your heads at Hitler's feet." This was the organization of Ukrainian nationalists, of whom Bandera ran the lesser grouping, but the more radical grouping. And this is a theme which is now seen today. The more extreme of the Ukrainian nationalists and Nazis really are the smaller groups, but those with the greater fear factor to steer the course of politics. From that era, Ian brings out research by Professor Imka on the Babi Yar.
Alex, sorry, I'm sorry that your mic is just getting worse and worse as you speak. So I'm afraid we're going to have to just come back to this at a later time.
Yeah, we can also continue developing this on Monday and Wednesday.
Yes. So I'm sorry about that, Alex. Well, look, it is 2:20. We want to do an extra this afternoon, so we'll probably leave the news there for today. But I think we had something to finish off with, Patrick.
Oh, I thought we always like to leave on a high note, and a lot of fans out there of the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, certainly our readership and viewership are big fans of Justin Trudeau. So we want to give everybody an update on what Trudeau's doing in Europe. And here we'll put this up on screen here. This is basically, yes, Trudeau takes Europe, and here he is talking to his military advisors here. I want to take selfies here, here, and here. There's his son looking on the background there. So it's good to know that Justin Trudeau has got a handle on the situation
Yes.
in Europe there.
Yes. Okay. Well, look, sorry about Alex's technical problems there. We'll have to leave it there for today. We will be back in a few minutes on the main live stream for some extra. And we will be back. What day is this? Friday. Yes, it becomes a blur. We'll be back as usual on Monday. So hopefully you will have a great weekend and we will see you then. But if you're a UK Column member, please stay with us for some extra. Okay, bye-bye.